It might be a long meeting this evening, so if everyone is ready, why don't we go ahead and call the April 16th meeting of the Board of Harbor Commissioners to order.
Frank Kelly.
Present.
Melanie Cushing, absent. Betsy Kramer.
Present.
Charles Watson.
Here.
Ken Owen.
Here. All right. Mr. Bridley, do we have any changes to the agenda?
Mr. Chair, we have no changes this evening.
All right. At this point, we would take public comment on any item which is not on our published agenda that we're going to cover this evening. If you do wish to speak on any item which is on our on the published agenda, you will need to fill out a request to speak slip. They're in the back of the room. Turn that in to Mary up front here. Let's go for the approval of the March 9th meeting's minutes. Is there a motion to so approve?
Mr. Chair, I move to approve.
All right. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Minutes are approved. Thank you. Since you were working, we'll have the department update.
Mr. Chair, members of the Harbor Commission, briefly just wanted to report on one item this evening. I think all of you received an invitation or a notice of a community meeting that was held last evening. It involved the West Beach, what we're calling mini master plan effort. We had sent out to many of the stakeholders throughout the harbor and waterfront area that had expressed interest about possibilities for recreational uses and other type of ocean-related activities on West Beach. And to a degree, this was a second phase or an adjunct to the West Beach Pedestrian Improvement Project that has been going on for about 2 years and should start construction in June. This was really a focused effort to get people's input on the beach, the sandy portion, as to, again, recreational or ocean-related, ocean-dependent uses. Happy to report that there was about 25 people in attendance. We got a lot of feedback and input from the stakeholders that currently use the beach and those that have some ideas about what also could be undertaken at that location. This was the first meeting of many as it relates to that. The study should be ongoing through the spring into the summer with a conclusion in late summer or early fall. So there will be other opportunities. Eventually there will be a presentation to the Harbor Commission, Planning Commission, Park and Recreation Commission. So I just wanted to alert you that it's ongoing and it was a productive meeting last night. Tentative agenda items for the May meeting. Again, we're still working on the Harbor Laundry agreement with the new tenant operator, the Minnow Cafe lease, and municipal code changes that Mick will present at that time. So if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. If not, we'll go on to the next division update.
All right. Are there any questions for Mr. Bridley? Thank you, John. If you go on to the Business Services report.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. At the February meeting, well, backing up a little bit, on January 1st, 2009, we installed an honor fee collection system in the Palm Park parking lot, in that beachfront lot that's shared by the skateboard park. Prior to that, we didn't collect any revenue from the Palm Park lot during the week between October 1st and April 30th. The lot was simply free and open. So on January 1st, we installed the honor fee collection system, and at the February meeting, when we reported this out, the Commission requested information on how much revenue, if there was any increase in revenue as a result. So in your packets tonight, there's a table in there showing a couple years worth of revenue for the January 1st to March 31st time period in the Palm Park lot. And if you look at 2008 versus 2009, it looks like the improvement was about $2,156 of additional revenue that was collected. Since the time this report was issued, we took another look at the revenues the daily revenues in the Palm Park lot during that period and subtracted out the weekend revenues that we would have ordinarily got anyway, and just looked at the weekday revenues that were being collected in the honor fee system, and that number turns out to be $7,015. So that's a new source of revenue for us. It would have been a zero. It's now $7,000. And that comes at a fortunate time because, again, if you look at 2008 versus 2009, we would have taken a bit of a dip in revenue in that parking lot. So this looks like a good improvement and a new revenue stream for us in that lot. Again, at the February meeting, the commissioners asked for some information on the New Beginnings Counseling Center Safe Parking Program. This is the RV overnight parking program that takes place in various lots around the city, in churches, private businesses, and several city lots, including the Garden Street or Pony Ride lot. And the question that was posed by the commission was, how many people have transferred into housing from the RV dwelling program? New Beginnings did send me an email that said 42 people had transitioned out of their program in fiscal year 2008, and approximately 30 people had transitioned into housing thus far in fiscal year 2009. But again, keep in mind, this is citywide. There are many more lots than the 3 city lots. There, like I mentioned, there are church lots and private lots and so forth. Subsequently, I did get an email from New Beginnings indicating that they don't keep any formal records on the individual lots, but they do believe that 2 of the families that have been staying in the Garden Street lot have been placed in housing during the past year. So I thought that would be useful information to pass along as well. Moving on to slip transfers, as reported at some previous commission meetings, slip transfer fee revenue has dropped off sharply this fiscal year. Chairman Kelly requested to have some analysis done of the number of slip transfers that are taking place, as well as the revenue that's being generated from those slip transfers. The thought being that if we are only doing a few big dollar, large vessel slip transfers, that we may have a more serious problem than is apparent just by looking at the revenue figures. So again, there's a table in your packet that indicates what the number of slip transfers as well as the revenue from those slip transfers has been this year and the previous 3 years. As it turns out, we average about 71 slip transfers a year over the past 3 years for the July to March time frame. And this year, from the July to March time frame, we did 27 slip transfers. What does that mean? That means our revenue for the July-March time frame is about 50% off of what it has been in prior years, and the number of slip transfers is about 58% off. So there isn't that, I hope that dispels the fear that we might be only doing a few large slip transfers and that's skewing the numbers. We've actually been transferring 20-footers, 25s, 30s, and just this last Monday we transferred a 40-foot slip on Monday the 13th. So hopefully that helps answers Chairman Kelly's question. In contrast to slip transactions, restaurant sales in the harbor and on Stearns Wharf are up on the slide here. They have not dropped off sharply, keeping in mind that this is calendar year 2007 compared to calendar year 2008. Most of the restaurants in the harbor and on the wharf are doing better did better in 2008 than they did in 2007, with a couple of exceptions, notably the Harbor Restaurant and Moby Dick Restaurant. However, some of the restaurants had the best year they've ever had, including Chuck's Waterfront Grill broke $3 million for the first time in their history. Santa Barbara Shellfish, with its whopping 26 indoor seats, broke $2 million for the first time in their history. And Shoreline Beach Cafe had it the best year they've had, probably due to a lot of improvements that the owners have been putting into the restaurant, including the water-resistant awning that they've put on so they can now operate on marginal rain days. They've installed a forced air unit instead of mushroom heaters, which is it heats from the deck, from below the deck, so it's a much more efficient way of heating. And if you drive by, you can see they've done some great improvements on the windows. You can see right through the deck and see a beautiful view of the islands right through the way they've redesigned and taken the frames off the windows. When March figures become available in the next few days, we can do another analysis and do a fiscal year comparison instead of this calendar year comparison and get a more up-to-date analysis for you if so desired. And that concludes the business services report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Scott. Are there any questions for Mr. Eidman? Commissioner Owen.
Scott, about the Palm Park lot, what's the cost of the program? Seems like you've got a very minor cost of actually going and collecting it, the fees a couple times a day. How much did the box cost?
Commissioner Owen, I don't have that figure in front of me, but it was a significant cost. Those boxes had to be fabricated, custom fabricated by Central Machine. The design of them was called out by Architectural Board of Review, so there's a fancy little metal filigree around the outside and so forth. If memory serves, those boxes, as unbelievable as it may sound, I believe they're around $70,000 installed.
Oh, so in 10 years we'll break even on the Palm Park. Okay.
I believe it would be a bit shorter than that.
Are there any further? Commissioner Kramer, did you wish to speak? Okay. If there are no further questions, before we go on to the next, the facilities management report, there have been other people coming in. I just want to remind you, if you wish to speak on any item which is going to come up in the agenda later, you will need to fill out a request to speak form in the back of the room and bring it up to Mary. All right, so we go to the facilities management report.
Good evening, Chairman Kelly and Commissioners. On March 2nd, Lash Construction Company began Phase 3 of the Breakwater Cap Repair Project. Phase 3 involves the demolition and reconstruction of the most easterly 18 panels on the Breakwater Cap, which will complete the entire cap. They demolished the slab a couple weeks ago, exposing the original walkway that was constructed in the 1950s. It turned out to be a little bit better than everybody thought, so the prep work before placing the forms and pouring the new slabs was a little bit less than anticipated. The forms are placed in an alternating fashion and poured about 3 a day, 2 days a week. They've poured 11 slabs and have 7 to go and should finish up the walkway itself by the end of this month and then move on to the parapet wall, which they should complete by the end of May. As some of you know, the Lost at Sea Memorial that was constructed in 2005 is out at that end of the breakwater. And last year we had to raise the level of the walkway up about 5 inches. So once this phase is completed, it's going to be a little bit higher than the Lost at Sea Memorial. That's required that we demolish the Lost at Sea Memorial slab adjacent to the new walkway, and we'll have to reconstruct it. It'll be sloped down to the existing Lost at Sea Memorial, consistent with the building code, to provide accessibility, and it'll be finished in the exact same pattern as it was, so it won't be very noticeable for the public. This whole entire project should be finished just about Memorial Day, and as I previously noted in a prior report, it was considerably less expensive than we had anticipated, and we expect to save a little over $100,000 on this project this year, so that's good news in this tough economic times. Harbor dredging started on March 28th, and as most of you know, it was scheduled to begin the beginning of March, but a gray whale showed up in the harbor, and just like the day before they were supposed to start, we consulted with the National Marine Fisheries Service, the Corps, and Fish and Game, and asked them whether or not they thought we should delay dredging for a little while. National Marine Fisheries Service took the lead on that, and based on their experience, they suggested we suspend dredging and wait until the whale moves on, which is typically the case. It seems like every year a couple whales wander into a couple different harbors up and down the coast of California, relax, feed, forage, do whatever they do, and off they go. And sure enough, National Marine Fisheries Service was correct. After about 3 weeks, the whale finally left, and dredging commenced, like I said, on March 28th. This year, it was a good year for the whale to show up because there wasn't very much sand in the harbor, in the Federal Channel. There were very, very few large swells which moved the sand in and create the need for dredging. There's only been about 105,000 cubic meters of sand deposited in the channel. Typically, it's about 120,000. AIS Construction Company has moved about 50,000 to date and should actually finish up the rest by the end of next week. Congress appropriated adequate funds for the entire project this year, but unfortunately the Corps has modified some of the contract language whereby they may not be able to begin dredging in fall, in October or November, which is typically the case. We're working with the Corps to ensure that AIS dredging removes every grain of sand they can possibly get at this spring to make sure that if dredging is delayed, that we'll have a safe navigation into the fall and early winter when they can get started. And finally, over in the marina, we continue making good progress on the Marina 2 redecking project. 9 of the 45-foot fingers have been replaced, and all 10 of the 35-foot fingers will be replaced by the end of this month. We bought a few new concrete floats and are able to actually fabricate the fingers in our maintenance yard in advance and launch them with the innovative Push Me Pull You trailer that staff developed and constructed last year. This has turned out to be a very efficient way to rebuild this marina. The first couple fingers were a little bit expensive and took a little bit of time with a steep learning curve, but staff has become very, very efficient, and this has proven to be a very cost-effective way to move forward with updating that marina. We propose to replace all 34 of the 25-foot slips this next fiscal year, and then all the 20 slips in fiscal year 2011, and that'll essentially rebuild that marina, and then we'll move on to marinas 3 and 4 over time. This concludes my report this evening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Carl. Are there any questions for Carl? I have one, Carl. One, I would like to thank you for the excellent work that maintenance has been doing and for saving the much-needed funds. Thank you very much. Do we have any idea on this part here where Congress is doing how much or how long that delay is? Any guesstimation on the fall dredging?
Chairman Kelly, the modification is the Corps' authority to award a contract before all the funds are in place. That's what's at issue. And John's been working with our lobbyist in Washington to try to get them to change that. So it's possible by the time fall comes around, it will no longer be a provision of the contract. If it isn't, when the fall comes around, we'll complain loud and ask for them to allow us to get started or appropriate the funds as quickly as possible.
Commissioner Watson.
Carl, they just happened to be down at the harbor at a time when one of your crews was floating a brand new finger that they had built in the city yard with their own hands. And I was very impressed with the way they were handling it and moving it around, and particularly pleased that we're able to do that kind of maintenance and replacement with our own forces. And I'm wondering if you have an estimate of what we might be saving by doing it ourselves as opposed to bidding that stuff out.
Chairman Kelly, Commissioner Watson, we've been tracking labor and material costs. Right now, it's at about $50 to $60 a square foot. Cost estimates are closer to about $70 a square foot for a private contractor to come and do the work. So that's a 20% savings or more over contracting that out. We expect to get more efficient. We actually are going to have one dock built by a private contractor this year, so we'll have a direct apple-to-apple comparison and make sure that we are as efficient as the private sector, or more so, is the goal.
I might add that the crew I talked to were very proud of their work. So
Thank you very much.
I like to see them motivated like that.
All right. Are there any further questions? Okay. To the Harbor Operations Report.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. I have a few events coming up that I'd like to report to you tonight about. You may have heard a couple of these before, but we're getting right on top of them, so I wanted to remind you and the public that they're happening. The first is our annual Operation Clean Sweep that will be taking place on Saturday, May 9th. This is where we partner with several volunteer organizations who provide divers and dock support to dive onto the harbor seafloor and bring up the various assorted junk that is down there. We've completed annually Marinas 2, 3, and 4 in the last 3 years, and this year we'll be working on the fish docks, the so-called CUDA docks in front of the Waterfront Center building, the City Pier area, and the fish floats north and south. Carl's crew actually was in the field yesterday doing a dive survey, which always helps us in that regard locate the primary stuff that's down there. So we're very much looking forward to that, and that'll be on Saturday, May 9th, and of course we will report out our catch results to you at your May meeting. The next day, after the Operation Clean Sweep on Sunday, we have the 940-foot cruise ship Sapphire Princess visiting Santa Barbara. They will be anchored between a half-mile and a mile offshore, and they will, as usual, send their tender boats back and forth, taking some 3,000 passengers to Sea Landy, where they'll be greeted by a range of hospitality organizations, including downtown organization, the Chamber, the Visitors and Conference Bureau, and what have you. and then they'll take off in trolleys and walking tours and buses and what have you to stimulate our economy and enjoy our city for the day. The ship will be leaving about 4 o'clock, and I'm happy to report that the ship's husbanding agent has already been sent a whole bunch of brochures advertising our businesses in the harbor and on Stearns Wharf, and we have confirmation that those have been distributed to the passengers on the ship, and in addition, they will be available when they get off the ship. So hopefully some of those folks will come and just enjoy the beautiful weather and the fine offerings of our harbor area and Stearns Wharf. So that's on May 10th. Oh, and as a footnote to that, if I might add, we have an ongoing and excellent relationship with the cruise ship business. By the numbers, since 2002, we've had 9 cruise ship visits, which is just about the right number. We get 1 to 2 of these a year, which, like I said, helps stimulate the economy without unduly upsetting harbor operations or the lovely ambiance of our city. So far, so good on our cruise ship relations, and we intend to stay on that track into the future. On May 16th, we have our annual harbor swap meet in partnership with the Harbor Merchants Association. That has become a very popular local event. That's where you can get boat gear, kayaks, surfboards, fishing gear, fishing tools, boat tools, all kinds of stuff from vendors who sign up for a mere $10 a space. It takes place in the Marina 3 parking lot. And the vendor sign-up sheet is now available in the Harbor Master's office. And we will be joined in that, like I said, by the Harbor Merchants Association, who will help provide coffee and donuts and goodies and free things to drink and what have you for anyone who cares to attend that. I would encourage the public to come down. We're going to do our best to enforce the no early bird rule. That's a challenge, as always, but we think the community deserves a shot at this stuff as well as anybody else. And so we're going to try and prevent people from grabbing the stuff up before the 8 o'clock bell. So it's 8 to noon on the 16th, Saturday. And coupled with that event, we had a successful stab at this last year, and so we're going to bring back the hazardous materials truck. So folks can get rid of the paints and the varnishes and the lacquers that might be in their dock box while they're clearing out their goods for the swap meet or making room for their goods for the swap meet that they're going to buy. And small quantities of gas and diesel are also welcomed, as well as propane tanks from a barbecue, from a boat barbecue or what have you. And in the May billing, the slip permittees will receive the famous Willy Wonka golden ticket entry card to the hazardous materials disposal site. This is basically in order to afford this accommodation to our slip permittees, but do the best we can to limit it to them and not folks coming from uptown looking at this as a one-stop dump site for what they've got in their garage. And so we're very much looking forward to that event as well, and coupled with the swap meet. And obviously there is no ticket needed to get into the swap meet, just to dispose of hazardous materials. And that concludes my report, Mr. Chair. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mick. Are there any questions for Mick? I have one. Mick, on the Sapphire Princess's cruise, is the harbor collecting fees from, I'm pretty sure we are, because we cover this about once in a blue moon when a ship shows up, but I can't remember. And what additional costs might we have in staffing and services when a cruise ship comes?
Mr. Chair, thank you for asking. It's the staffing is relatively minimal because the facility security plan and the primary manning goes on at Sea Landing. Harbor Patrol provides a support role. Our administrative analyst, Brian Slagle, has helped with distribution of the brochures, like I mentioned, and is really our liaison to the cruise ships when they come. So the staffing is relatively minimal. On the revenue side, we charge $5 a person for the entire manifest, ship's manifest, including passengers and crew. We anticipate revenue in the neighborhood of $18,000 for this visit.
Thank you very much. One other idea. Folks that have their slip payments, and I don't know because I still do mine the old-fashioned way where you mail in your check, and they're on an auto payment, will they still receive the ticket for the hazmat?
You know that, Mr. Chair, that's a good question, but I will make sure they do.
Okay.
Thank you for reminding me.
Thank you.
I can.
If there are no further questions,
Mr. Chair, I
Chair,
can
Scott.
answer that question
Okay.
for you. Slip holders that are on the automatic payment system continue to receive their ordinary slip statement every month in the mail.
Okay.
So they will get the ticket automatically. They just don't have to send in the payment because it gets drafted out of their bank account, but they get the same statement that you get.
okay. Thank you very much for clarifying that, Scott. If there are no further questions on the Harbor Operations Report, we go up to the Harbor Commission matter.
Mr. Chair, as noted on the agenda, Commissioner Kramer requested that this item be placed on tonight's agenda. As you know, most recently the city attorney distributed to all members of the Harbor Commission some previous legal opinions as it relates to the Political Reform Act and the Fair Political Practices Commission's regulations as it pertains to potential conflict of interest matters for harbor commissioners who also serve as slip holders or slip permittees and their actions on the Harbor Commission. So that's why it's on the agenda, and at that point I would turn it over to Mrs. Kramer.
And I'd like to explain why I asked for it to be on, and I asked for this item to be placed on the agenda for clarification of the conflict of interest insofar as it applies to us on the Harbor Commission. And I was particularly concerned when I read in the paper about a flyer being distributed by two of our harbor commissioners. And everyone else has been on this commission for much longer than I, and perhaps is thoroughly familiar with the Fair Political Practices Commission requirements. However, the issue of who can vote on an increase of slipholder fees came up at our last meeting, and it seemed to me that others were uncertain of the exact FPPC requirements. And when I applied to be on the commission, an important question asked was whether I was a slipholder, because if so, I could not vote on matters relating to slip fees. Chair Kelly noted that about slipholders at the last meeting. However, when I saw the flyer distributed around the harbor signed by two of us, I wanted to know exactly what is the law. And as Waterfront Director Mr. Bridley just mentioned, that we did receive opinions from the city attorney, and there's one specific statement that Mr. Wiley makes. And he says, consequently, the city attorney's office continues to believe that as city public officials, a harbor commissioner who is a slip permit holder may not publicly advocate either for or against an increase or decrease in slip permit fees or slip transfer fees. This is true without regard to whether the commissioner involved states that they are speaking as an individual or as a member of the commission. And I think the opinions of the attorneys Wiley and Knecht answer the questions, and they're important ones for all of us here and those watching, those interested in the waterfront budget to understand. The letter of the law is important, but even more important, I feel, and I'm saying this as a non-practicing lawyer, is the appearance of fairness and impartiality. I'm sure that no one on the commission is here out of self-interest or in any form acting out of self-interest, but it's important that be clear to everyone. The flyer distributed to all the boats in the harbor brought that into question, in my opinion. Thank you.
Any additional comment?
Yeah, why can't you vote on a slip fee increase for yourself?
There's no reason why you couldn't, actually, in my opinion. But what I'm going to do on that point, since that's where we are on the Harbor Commission matter, because it would be just as germane to bring it up here as in the new business, is go back in all these. The first memo we ever got was one in February 6, 2003 from Michelle Montez, at that point the deputy city attorney. And that's really the only memo that goes in detail through the statute and without just giving an opinion on it. And at that point, Michelle Montez basically says that there's a pretty straightforward bar for a reasonably foreseeable material financial effect. That's the quote. And a reasonably foreseeable financial effect on a public official's personal finances is material, which is the language in the law, if it is at least $250 in any 12-month period. This is not an opinion. This is 2 California Code of Regulations, sections 18705.5A, and that is what the law says. So then further down, she basically says a conflict of interest is present with respect to slip transfer fees, but not the monthly slip use fees. Her concern was the perception of a conflict of interest. So having very clearly said what the letter of the law says, which is the $250 in any 12-month period, to make sure there is no perception, I would like to go on the record for myself. My slip is in Marina 1. It's on finger H. It is slip 36. My current slip fee is $288.36 a month. A 4% increase would be $11.54 per month. That would be a 4% increase. Times 12 is $138.48 in any 12-month period. That does not seem to come to the letter of the law. And since that is now public and on the record, I don't see that there is a perception that anyone would have of a conflict of interest on my part, because those were the 2 pillars that have been a problem. And that's what I would say on that matter. Commissioner Watson.
Mr. Chair, my slip is 1R15. It's a 50-foot slip. I pay $9.01 per foot per month. That comes out to be $450.50 times 12. And then at 4% of that, which is what the slip, the issue at hand in the recommendation from staff, the 4% increase, that comes to $216. Now that is, it's close to the $250, but it's well below it. Maybe I shouldn't say it's close to it. I would say it's well below it. We'd have to be talking in the neighborhood of 5% before I'd be affected. So that's my statement as to why I feel that I should be voting on this. I believe I have a duty to all harbors users and to the city council and to the city administrator to act in the best interest of all harbor users, and including a group that I may be also a part of. I'm one slip holder out of the number 1,133 slips. I'm one slip holder. So that's a sizable sector of the harbor to be presented, and I believe that the intent of my duties are to look out for those users and people who have a stake, a financial stake in the harbor. I further think it's somewhat, well, maybe ironic that I have supported every single slip fee increase, monthly slip fee increase that's come before, because I have believed that those were appropriate and necessary and reasonable. So for someone might possibly have a perception that I have a conflict of interest is pure speculation. If I live my life that way, worried about such remote dangers, I'd never get out of bed in the morning. So that's how I feel about it, and I think that the city attorney's memos are painting a catastrophic picture and falls under the category of Chicken Little and the sky falling.
Commissioner Owen.
Well, Charlie, I've agreed ever since. I mean, it didn't used to be this way years ago. People just voted on slip fee increases, and then at some point down the line, we were told it was a conflict of interest. I used to live on a boat, but not since. I never had that conflict being on the commission. Didn't have a boat since I've been on the commission. So I sort of asked you facetiously a moment ago, why shouldn't you be allowed to increase your own fees, ultimately, is what I mean by that. But it sounds to me like that's a fiscal effect, and it's irrespective of whether it's in your favor or not. The $250 part seems clear to me, but the perception of conflict of interest isn't. I don't know what the definition of that is. You've defined it as saying, hey, I'm going to this isn't going to affect me by $250 per year. That's your definition. I don't know what that definition is. So that concerns me a little bit. Possibly it's just that somebody could say the harbor commissioners are voting on their own slip fee increases, and they would just feel bad about that or not like that. That's a perception. Wrong-headed or not, that might just be a perception. So we do you guys open yourselves up to that, and maybe as a commission as a whole, we might, and as a waterfront department, might take some heat for that, because people are saying, could possibly say, even if it doesn't make sense, that there's a conflict there. Maybe that's what they mean. It's the appearance of conflict, not necessarily whether there's a conflict. I would feel more comfortable if you guys weren't voting on it. But that being put out on the record, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not going to abstain because you might vote or something like that.
All right. Any other comments or questions? I think we're off to the new business, Mary.
Fiscal year 2010 operating budget recommendation. Recommendation that Harbor Commission A receive a staff presentation on the waterfront department's proposed fiscal year 2010 budget submittal, including various budget scenarios requested by the Commission at the March 2009 meeting. B, recommend approval of a $25 per linear foot. Oh, sorry. Do you want me to start over? Okay. Recommendation that Harbor Commission A receive a staff presentation on the Waterfront Department's proposed fiscal year 2010 budget submittal, including various budget scenarios requested by the Commission at the March 2009 meeting. B, recommend approval of a $25 per linear foot slip transfer fee increase in fiscal year 2010 on all slip categories except 20-foot slips. C, recommend approval of a 4% slip fee increase in fiscal year 2010. And D, forward a recommendation to City Council for approval of the Waterfront Department's proposed fiscal year 2010 budget and incorporation into the city budget process.
Before we start, what I want to do is explain to the public that's present. The way I would like to cover this is we'll have the staff's presentation of the Waterfront Department budget with all its variations. Then we'll take the public comment, and then at that point the Commission will debate it.
You want to see if other people want to turn in more slips, because I think they keep coming in.
Thank you. Yeah, if you have come in and you wish to speak on this particular item, you'll need to fill out a request to speak form in the back of the room, and then turn that into Mary, and then we can recognize you and you can make your comments.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, Scott and I are actually going to share the presentation aspects of tonight's budget presentation, and I'll turn the lights in just one sec once we get started. as you as commissioners know, we've actually gone through the budget for the last 2 or 3 months. But there's a lot of people here tonight, so our expectation was that we need to go back and go through it once again. So I hope you'll bear with us. There are some new components of this presentation, as you know, per your staff report. And so we'll kind of start from the beginning. And then if you have any questions of either Scott or myself, we can address that at the end of the presentation.
Okay, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, as John said, for the benefit of the tonight and also folks that may be watching at home, we're going to run through this basically start to finish. So some of these slides, many of them you may have seen before, but a lot of other folks might not have. Tonight's meeting, this is the process that we've gone through to date, and tonight's meeting is actually the 4th publicly noticed meeting where we've discussed all of these matters, including operational budget cutbacks, capital program cutbacks, potential fee increases, and the widely discussed potential for a funding shift from the Waterfront Department to the general fund. All of these matters were discussed at the Harbor Commission Budget Committee publicly noticed meeting on February 17th. The Budget Committee consisting of Chairman Kelly and Commissioner Watson. We ran through these issues again with the full commission at the February 26th meeting, and then on March 19th last month we forwarded a recommendation which also covered these issues of operational cutbacks, capital program cutbacks, potential fee increases, and potential funding shift to the general fund. The next step, I think it's important that folks realize, the next step is the Waterfront Department will make its budget presentation to the City Council on June 1st, 2009. That's a Monday at 3 o'clock in this room. So that's tentative, but right now that's the schedule that we've got in case anyone wants to attend that meeting as well. Okay, for fiscal year 2009, we're looking at a potential revenue shortfall of on the order of $500,000. And as we've talked about, this is particularly due to a sharp decline in slip transfer fee revenues. In the current economy, boats aren't selling like they were in previous years, and slips aren't transferring like they were in previous years. We don't necessarily expect this to improve dramatically in fiscal year 2010. So we probably anticipate about a $500,000 shortfall in slip transfer revenue again next year. So in order to address this, we're looking at making operating fund budget cutbacks for fiscal year 2010 on the order of $553,000. We're also recommending capital fund program cuts on the magnitude of $170,000 and a variety of potential fee increases, particularly parking and visitor slip fee increases around the magnitude of $574,000 to $577,000. Again, in terms of the operating budget, this is just a summary of the waterfront operating budget: salaries and benefits, supplies and services, allocated costs, appropriated reserve, and debt service. And again, the savings or the reduction there is $553,000 that we've cut from the operating budget to help address this shortfall. A different fund is our capital improvement program, or CIP. The capital fund, we're recommending reductions of a total of $170,000. This is consisting of reducing marina capital improvements by $25,000 in fiscal year 2010, reducing the Stearns Wharf pile driving contract by $50,000 in 2010, and eliminating the Navy Pier timber replacement project entirely. We redecked the entire Navy Pier this year, and the piles and supporting structure are in good shape, and so we were able to simply eliminate this project. Additionally, we'll be replacing the video security system, and we cut $15,000 out of that. So that's a total reduction of $170,000 next year out of our capital program. I'd like to bring your attention to the two items at the bottom of the list there in italics: the launch ramp concrete project and the Marina One walkway and utility replacement project for about $2.6 million. These projects will proceed beginning next year if and only if we receive the grant funding and the loan funding that we have applied for from the California Department of Boating and Waterways. If we don't get that funding, we will not, if we don't get matching funding, we will not proceed with those projects. So that's a synopsis of the cutbacks to the operating and capital fund. $553,000 cut to the operating fund, $170,000 cut to the capital fund, adds up to $723,000 in budget cuts. In terms of fee increases, we're looking at a variety of parking fee increases, including the hourly parking fee, such as a visitor would pay in the main harbor parking lot. In 2003, we increased it to $1.50 an hour. We're proposing to increase it to $2 an hour in 2010. Also on Stearns Wharf, we're proposing to increase the parking fee from $2 an hour to $2.50 an hour, but we'll retain the 90-minute free parking with validation from a merchant out on Stearns Wharf. We have vetted this through the Harbor Merchants Association and the Wharf Merchants Association, and the associations, with the exception of one individual, are not unduly concerned with these parking fee increases. Additionally, we're proposing a $25 per foot slip transfer fee increase, as we've been doing for quite a number of years now, except for on the 20-foot slips. A slip fee increase of 2% as our baseline budget proposal. A visitor slip fee increase from 60 cents to 90 cents a foot per night. We did a survey in January and found that our visitor slip fees are far below many other harbors are charging $1 or more per night for their transient slip fees. The exception to this would be commercial fishing vessels producing fish tickets would be subject to a 10-cent per night slip fee visitor slip fee increase from 60 to 70 cents a foot a night. What does this all mean in terms of projected revenue? The fee increases, we've projected the hourly fee increase to generate approximately $223,000 next year, the wharf parking fee increase to generate $49,000, and the visitor slip fee increase to generate $182,000. So if you do a subtotal on that, the people visiting the harbor either in their car and parking and paying the hourly fees, or people visiting the harbor in the boat and paying visitor slip fees would account for $454,000 of the $574,000 of fee increases. So the bulk of these fee increases falls upon the visitor rather than the resident boater. Again, in addition, we expect the slip transfer fees to generate somewhere in the neighborhood of $50,000 next year, and the 2% slip fee increase equates to approximately $70,000. That's how we get to the $574,000 fee increase. There are other additional minor fee increases that we're looking at. These are basically administrative in nature. Meeting room rentals, such as the Marine Center classroom, we're proposing to increase from $25 an hour to $50 an hour for commercial and private non-ocean related uses. Ocean related nonprofits can still apply to use the room for free. The city pier dockage fee would go up from 40 cents to 50 cents a foot, the administrative processing fee from $25 to $50, and this processing fee comes into play when you put a new boat in your slip or add a spouse to your slip permit. The all-day maximum parking fee would go from $9 to $10 a day for the hourly parking fee, and the all-day maximum trailer parking fee would go from $6 to $8, and the annual BAP charter permits would go from $100 a year to $250 a year. So to summarize the revenue, we expect to generate a total revenue of approximately, well, we budgeted $11.5 million for fiscal year 2009, and as I mentioned earlier, we probably will not achieve 11.5 in 2009. With the fee increases that I just outlined, we budget about $11.4 million in total operating revenue for fiscal year 2010.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Watson.
Yeah, I don't mean to, or I'm sorry to interrupt, but you said that something about adding a spouse there was a fee for that, adding a spouse to a slip. I'm under the understanding that the spouse is automatically covered if the would be added as a matter of course if the other spouse that had the slip in his or her name got killed, right, or died, that the surviving spouse would take possession of the slip. Am I incorrect in my understanding?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Watson, I'll take a stab at that one since I manage the marina management program in our department. You're correct, Commissioner Watson. The fact of the matter is that our municipal code and our city council resolutions do say that if a sole slip permittee were to pass away, their spouse or legally registered domestic partner does have the right to assume that slip permittee role. The administrative fee you're looking at here is for people who want a little more belt and suspenders, a little peace of mind, a little personal security, so they physically come in and pay the $25, which will go up, of course, with this, to add their spouse or legally registered domestic partners, so they know that if laws or resolutions or what have you changed in the past, at least they've inked it now. I think it's really just a security measure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so to summarize the fiscal year 2010 baseline budget summary before any discussion of funding shifts and so forth, the fiscal year 2010 proposed budget has operating revenue of $4.3 million, operating expense of $10.3 million with a net gain of about $1.1 million. The net gain from the operating fund flows into our capital reserve fund, otherwise known as the Harbor Preservation Fund, to fund capital projects as we move through our 6-year capital improvement plan. Wait a second. Okay. Although this is a 1-year budget proposal, we like to project out 6 years into the future to see if we can fund the capital projects that we've scheduled while still maintaining adequate reserves. So we'll talk about the baseline assumptions for the 6-year capital, the 6-year cash flow model that we're about to see. Those assumptions would be a 1% revenue growth in the parking and property management programs in 2011 and 2% growth thereafter, which is typically what we project in the parking and property management. Slip transfer fee would continue to be increased from 2011 to 2015 at $25 per foot per year. Slip fees would continue to be increased at 2% per year from 2011 to 2015, and we would anticipate capital program cuts of $395,000, additional capital program cuts of $395,000 in fiscal year 2011 through 2015, for total capital program cuts of $565,000. So in terms of projecting out 6 years, looking at the middle row there, the net gain, we anticipate approximately $5.6 million net gain in revenue from the years 2009 to 2015. We've scheduled $12.5 million in capital projects from 2010 to 2015. $5.5 million of those capital projects will be funded by the Department of Boating and Waterways, as I mentioned earlier, or they will not be undertaken, or they will need to be postponed until that funding becomes available. The remaining $6.9 million of capital project needs will be funded from the net gain from the operating fund or the Harbor Preservation Fund. And this brings us to our first of 3 cash flow scenarios that you're going to see this evening. This is the baseline without the funding shift. Next, we'll discuss the funding shift, and then we'll look at the Harbor Commission's recommendation from March 19th's meeting. But under this baseline scenario, the operating reserves are maintained at the required 25%, and the Harbor Preservation Fund is maintained above the $2 million in the outlying year of 2015. It's actually $2.5 million for total reserves of $5.1 million in 2015. So this plan works. It keeps us above our required minimums. And at this point, we're going to move into the fund shift issue, which has been widely discussed. We now have those actual numbers to discuss. It's not hypothetical anymore, and I'll turn it over to John to take it from here.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, as you know, for many months, or the last several months anyway, we have not known the actual components or details of the proposed program or funding shift. And just within the last several weeks, the details of that have been worked out, and what you see is what is proposed. So I'm going to walk you through the components of the shift so you understand those, and then I'm going to walk you through what I believe to be some rationale or nexus as it relates to that. The first item is the beach lifeguard program. That's the seasonal lifeguard program that takes place, typically from early spring to early fall and throughout the summer months. And that cost, which would be funded and paid to the general fund by the Waterfront Department, is $147,000 annually. The next item is the 4th of July fireworks show or event that takes place. It's about a $50,000 contract with the Pyrotechnic fireworks company, and about $5,000 for additional Marburg dumpsters for that day at the harbor area. The next proposal does not involve a funding shift, but rather a management shift, where the Waterfront Department would take on 3 additional restrooms in the waterfront area, along with the maintenance and issues related to the Dolphin Fountain, which is at the base of Stearns Wharf. Those 3 restrooms are currently located at the base of Stearns Wharf, the public restroom directly adjacent to the entrance of Stearns Wharf. The Garden Street public restroom, which was recently built, what I call the pony ride lot, over on Garden Street next to the Visitor Center. And a third restroom is located along Ledbetter Beach between the Shoreline Beach Cafe and Harbor West, directly adjacent to those 2 facilities. And we added a contingency factor because, to a degree, with the last component of the funding shift, we're not certain what it will cost for our department to maintain, repair, make capital improvements to those 3 restrooms in the upcoming year if the program shift is approved. So we added a bit of a contingency. We also are aware that potentially the fireworks show costs are going to go up, maybe not for this 4th of July, but for the future. So there's a contingency added to it. Now, obviously, this commission has had concerns about the nexus as it relates to why the Waterfront Department should be involved in these type of program shifts or funding shifts. My goal is not necessarily to convince you, but to give you the rationale. As you know, the Waterfront Department is governed to a degree, if not wholly, by the State Tidelands Trust Agreement. That State Tidelands Trust Agreement says that all funds derived from the enterprise within the Waterfront Department should stay and be maintained and utilized for recreational, ocean-dependent, ocean-related activities within the waterfront. Unfortunately, it is both general and broad as it relates to other type of activities that could be argued that would be the responsibility of the enterprise to pay for. So let me, with that premise, kind of walk through the components of this funding shift. The beach lifeguard program, as you know, is an ocean rescue or ocean protection type of activity that takes place literally from Ledbetter Beach to East Beach. It's fair to say that my Harbor Patrol officers interface and interact with beach lifeguard programs throughout the period of time that they're in place. Clearly, emergencies that take place on the beach, both Harbor Patrol responds, lifeguards respond. Boating or swimming conflicts that take place along our beaches are monitored by both agencies, and they are our eyes, if you will, on the beach as it relates to those type of activities. The next item as it relates to the 4th of July, as all of you know, the 4th of July event stems from the harbor itself. It's literally on our doorstep. Many harbor users come down for the 4th of July. It's probably our largest day in terms of parking revenue. All of our parking lots are overfull or filled for that day. And our businesses, both on Stearns Wharf and in the harbor, directly benefit from the community event that takes place there. Now, I'm not going to try and argue that it's not a community event, because it is. The community as a whole certainly benefits from the fact that this activity takes place at the harbor or at the waterfront department. The 3 restrooms I'd like to put in context from the standpoint of what our department currently does. We currently maintain and manage and clean 12 restrooms in the waterfront area, both on Stearns Wharf, in the harbor, and related facilities. So this is something that we do. We have not obviously managed or been involved in these 3 facilities previously, and one of the reasons that I felt that we did not want to pay the Park and Recreation Department to do it is that we have the staff, the knowledge, and the capabilities to do so. So this is, again, not a fund shift, a management shift. We will not be paying a cost to do that except for our own staff or contractual services if this program shift would be approved. So that basically covers the components. The dollar amount is equal to the one that we've been kind of anticipating and programmed into our cash flows previously, which leads me to kind of the next issue as to how we would pay for this. Our recommendation would be that all of the baseline information that Scott provided you in detail would remain our base budget component. But in order to pick up the additional costs of these proposed funding and program shifts to the department, we would need to augment that additional fee revenue, and with the next slide, as you'll see, some additional cuts. The honor fee parking program currently is geared at a $2 for 3 hours of parking. We would bump that up to $3 for 3 hours of parking, and that we expect would generate approximately $75,000 annually. In addition, we would increase the slip fee from the baseline recommended 2% to 4% in starting in July of this year. And that additional revenue would be $145,000 on top of the baseline that Scott just went over. Again, applying the same concept of we can't do this in a vacuum, so that we need to look at where we are with next year's budget also as it relates to that 6-year CIP. We have to factor this proposed program shift into that same cash flow assumption and that 6-year picture that Scott talked about. So using, again, the same revenue growth that we talked about before, 1% and then 2% thereafter, after 2011. The slip transfer fee the same, a slip fee increase not only in July of this year, but again in 2011 and 2012. Assuming we would have increased slip fees at 2% annually over that same 3-year period, this would equate to an additional 5% over that 3 years. However, I need to remind you, just as Scott did, this is a 1-year budget proposal. We will be back doing the same thing probably next January and February, and if revenues have improved, both whether it's slip transfer fee or our own businesses or our parking revenues, it may not be necessary to adjust those slip fees at those rates. We will take another look at that time. Capital program cuts, and this is where it really begins to hurt, because Scott's already talked about 170 in this year, another 200,000 in the next year. But if we were to go forward, we would need to cut another 595,000 on top of the 170 that we proposed, so over almost 800,000 in total. So this begins to erode into our capital improvement projects that we think are important, but we've prioritized those and we've given those to you as to what we would propose should this program shift occur. Again, the goal is to make sure that we meet our operating reserves at the 25% level and our harbor preservation fund somewhere between $2 million and $5 million. So this gets us almost at the same level at $2.5 million harbor preservation fund, give or take a few $100,000 throughout that same 6-year period, and total reserves through that period of time of almost $5 million at any given year. And that's kind of been our benchmark of what we've shot for with our revenue and expense line items. All right, I'm going to shift gears again. That really covered the program shift item. The next item that I would like to go over is an item which the Harbor Commission requested that our department present at this next meeting or tonight. The Harbor Commission at the last meeting requested that we resubmit this budget to meet any parks fund shift by reducing staff instead of raising any additional raising revenue through additional fee increases or any capital improvement cuts. So as we talked about, the additional fee increases were approximately $145,000. The additional capital program cuts were about $200,000. So the need was then to eliminate staff positions in the magnitude of approximately $345,000. So basically, in order to come to that $350,000 benchmark, we would need to cut approximately 6 positions or 6 positions or a combination of that. And the positions are the executive assistant in my office, the accounting assistant in our accounting and property management division, an assistant parking coordinator in our parking program, a waterfront maintenance worker 1 in our facilities division, the night wharfinger, which provides security on the wharf throughout the graveyard period, and then our harbor patrol crew, which assists our harbor patrol operations. And I'll next go through kind of an outline or a summary of those impacts. So if we did that and cut those positions, again, comparing it back to the 6-year cash flow model, we're right back to where I think the Commission would like us to be, slightly above where we would have been with the 2 previous cash flows, the baseline and the program shift, but still, again, in the ballpark of about a $5 million annual total reserves available, both operating and harbor preservation fund. Service impacts. Obviously, by eliminating 6 positions or a combination in the department, that's about 10% of our entire workforce would have, in our opinion, service impacts that should be identified. And so I ask each of the managers to identify those impacts just by what these individuals do, not saying if they were gone what those impacts would be to the people that are then shift with the responsibility to fill in or how we would cover that. Obviously with the executive assistant, which is sitting before you in front of us, we would have less support to the director and managers. We certainly would have less production of Harbor Commission reports and council agenda items, as she provides constant support to Harbor Commission meetings and also performs other confidential related personnel matters in office. Eliminating an accounting assistant would affect our slip billing process in coordination with the finance department. No payroll processing, as that individual does that solely for our entire department. And no accounts payable processing would be done and would have to be shifted to other staff. Parking coordinator. This individual provides supervision of our revenue control. As you can imagine, we really are a cash operation in the parking program. Literally all hourly fees are collected on a cash basis. This individual also has oversight of our parking lot for rentals for wedding and events, and without that individual, we could have an actual loss of revenue. It provides oversight and direction to our hourly employees. Keep in mind that many of our staff are just that, temporary hourly employees, and are not permanent. And I believe it would be critical to saying when lots should be open, when lots should close, because I can't really rely on an hourly individual who's just collecting the money to make those determinations. Maintenance Worker 1. This is our lowest classification in the maintenance division. This individual does perform preventive maintenance tasks and work orders, so it would certainly have an impact on that process, slowing it down or delaying those activities. The individual also does significant trash and debris removal throughout the harbor. There would be no maintenance and oversight of the waste oil disposal facilities, as this position really covers that completely. And if we would get the program shifts, it would have an impact because this individual also does custodial work as it relates to the restrooms. Eliminating the night wharfinger on Stearns Wharf. We have a significant concern as it relates to the security and fire risks on Stearns Wharf. Without this individual, there would not be eyes and ears on the wharf for the 24/7 period of time. Also, we believe it would decrease Harbor Patrol response time in that they would need to be basically covering that activity. And clearly this individual has been very helpful for us in observation of emergencies of boats potentially careening off Stearns Wharf as they're there during the evening and during that storm period. So the response times would be delayed. Elimination of Harbor Patrol crew, again an hourly position. We think this will have an impact on the Harbor Patrol officers and patrol operations. Decreased response capabilities in that we have fewer hands. The individuals typically assist in emergency calls, assisting with security vessel patrols, and helps alleviate the need for the ability for the harbor patrols to focus on incidents and more of the emergency type of response, and let this individual kind of work on the maintenance and vessel issues for maintaining our harbor patrol boats. Conclusion. Staff believes that the service impacts of the elimination of these identified positions to really be an unacceptable alternative to what we believe is a minor adjustment in fee revenues to cover any potential program shifts. The compromise in safety and maintenance in the harbor would, in our opinion, not be worth that risk, and it also has the potential to affect our overall revenue within the department. And so I think that concludes those two portions. Scotty, is there anything left? All right. Our recommendations for the one-year budget that's before you, again, would be to cover the operating fund reductions that we talked about, the $553,000, the $170 in our capital improvement program for next year, and to adjust our fees by some $722,000. And then again, I'll reemphasize that this is a one-year budget, and what fees that would be adjusted in the next coming budget cycle will have to be evaluated in about 12 months.
And that's it, right? End. So at this point, before we go to any commission discussion, let's start taking the public comment. There's a lot of you out there. Thank you for waiting. We'll start with just how they come on my desk here. David Turpin. Whoa. There we go.
This is the first time I've looked at any of this tonight, so I may have a very fundamental misunderstanding. But what I just thought I heard was that we're predicting a $500,000 budget shortfall. And what I see here is $1.3 million worth of combined revenue increases and reduction in capital programs. Is that right?
If you'll keep the comments to the commission always, thank you.
Exactly. That's the way it looks to me. So I think that's an issue that I think might want to be discussed.
His mic is on, according to what I've got here. Oh, wait a minute. It's on now. Sorry.
And I saw an article recently indicating that there is a proposal in Sacramento now to fold the Department of Boating and Waterways into the State Parks and Recreations Department, which would probably drastically change our ability to get loans and grants from that agency. So I don't think we ought to be counting on that if that change happens. This is not quite on the budget, but one of the commissioners raised this question about the transfer of a slip to a spouse, and I heard the staff member say that that right belongs to a spouse or a registered domestic partner. The basis for the city attorney's opinion that spouses are entitled to inherit these slips but no one else is that they are presumed to be community property. There's no such thing as community property for registered domestic partners. So if we've now extended that right to registered domestic partners, it's presumably on some basis other than a presumption of community property. Finally, I, like probably everyone else who has a slip, a 2% increase, a 4% increase is not that much money. The slip is still a bargain. I'm not going to give up my slip if the fees go up. But I just don't think it's appropriate for slip holders to be paying for things that have nothing to do with holding a slip. When the people who own boats and slips come down to watch the 4th of July fireworks, they and all their guests don't arrive on their boats. They drive down to the harbor in their cars, and they pay to park somewhere to watch the fireworks. So why don't we pay for all of this with parking revenue? Thanks.
Thank you. Bob Keating.
Mine was on
Oh, excuse me.
a public comment.
Bob, I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
It went right in with everything else. Does that mean you don't want to make those comments?
Well, maybe at the end or when this topic is done.
All right. Ooh, Gary Longaberger.
Mr. Chair, Harbor Commissioners, City staff, there's been a misunderstanding. The majority of boat owners are not rich. If you go, please, I would like to let people, the City Council, people are making these decisions, go down to the harbor. Look at the boats down in the harbor. They're averaging around 20 to 25 years old. And it's very important for the city to know that the harbor boat owners have been impacted by this downturn in the economy. And the biggest red flag to look at for them to understand how it is impacting boat owners is there's been a major increase in the sale of boats and slips. And with the economy being what it is, they've been sitting on the market for a long time. So to increase these slip fees is going to be catastrophic and is going to add to more people, forcing them to sell their boats and slips. Now, look at the liveaboards. They represent 10% of the boat owners down there. And they just a couple of years ago had a 40% increase in rent. How many people can afford a 40% increase in rent? Now you're going to throw in the extra 4, it's going to add up to about 10% in 3 years. What's going to happen is the ramification is these people are going to end up in the anchorage. They're going to end up with derelict boats on the beach. And a lot of them are going to end up being homeless because they can no longer afford to live in the harbor. Now what it all comes down to is, individuals, families, and businesses are now being forced to cut back because of a reduced income. So why does the city, with a $10 million deficit, feel it's okay to continue the policy of tax and spend? You know, it's no longer about one group taking the bulk of the tax like we have for 8 years. It's a whole new theme, a change that we're all going to chip in and fight this together. So the idea that you're going to put this tax on the backs of the boaters and just take this Band-Aid approach when we got this major deficit, if you really want to look at it, I mean, what we need is to cut the fat, liposuction, is to cut the city spending. Let's all chip in. If you want to put it, let's all chip in and have the city employees, the departments, everybody chip in. It's not about putting it on one group. It's about everybody chipping in. And I call on the city council to embrace this change, because united we stand, divided we deficit.
Steve Young.
Our esteemed waterfront director has talked about the rationale for some of these proposed program shifts coming into the department responsibility, largely, I think, on the basis of the fact that the proposed program shifts have some synergy with what the department is doing anyway. And that may be true, but there's no way, I think, that the fact that these two things are synergistic means that program items should be moved into the waterfront department without some of the funding moving with it. So if it makes sense for us to clean lavatories, that's fine, if it's more efficient for the city to do it that way. But the funding already allocated to cleaning those lavatories should be moved with the responsibility. So I want to say very strongly that I believe it's quite wrong to increase the fees that the waterfront constituency, that's us as slip owners and parkers and other people who provide the revenue. I think it's very wrong that they should be expected to pick up the cost of things coming into the department simply because they're synergistic with some of the things we already do. It may be that the staff would like to have more under their umbrella. The department grows bigger, people get more powerful. So I could see why some of the waterfront staff might want to bring in these changes, but to let them come in without the funding moving with it is totally wrong. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen Novak.
My name is Karen Novak. I would encourage you to vote no on the City Council's proposal to move the fund shift. I understand that it is a park and recreation fee transfer, if that is correct. We already, I think the 2% is reasonable, but we already, as slip holders, pay a property tax on our slips. We pay our monthly rental. We pay for parking, and sometimes we can't even park because it's too crowded. And now we also are going to have increase in slip fees. So again, I just think that that much of an increase is high compared to the 2% that is more reasonable. Thank you.
Thank you. Marilyn Kelly. I know her.
Good evening. I'm Marilyn Kelly, and I ask you not to make slip holders bear the financial burden of maintaining the Dolphin Fountain, public beach lifeguards, 4th of July fireworks, and public restrooms. Please do not pass the park and recreation responsibility to the waterfront department. Privileges enjoyed by the entire city population and the tourist population are not the responsibility of slip holders. We already pay high fees for marina usage. The City Council's attempts to confuse this issue is insulting. Their shell game of where to hide their mismanagement of city money must stop, and you should do it. Stop it. Thank you.
Bob, before we go into our discussion, is this a time that you want to do this?
I don't think so.
Okay. Okay. I am so sorry for missing your... Okay, we have before us an issue here, which is the budget recommendation. Any of the commissioners want to dive in? Commissioner Watson.
Mr. Chair, I firmly believe that this funding shift concept is wrong. We're taking activities that benefit the city at large and pushing them onto a small group of harbor users in an enterprise zone where we are required to earn all the money that we spend, and we're in a situation where we are not really keeping up with our maintenance and our replacement programs already because of the economic setback we're currently having. We are putting off needed capital improvement programs. The Marina One replacement needs to be done. Someone walking down the main walkway can see that it's beginning to crumble. We've been patching it for years, but the patching seems to be not keeping up with the deterioration. I don't think they're going to sink tomorrow. We got some time to plan for it, and we have been planning for it. We've been counting on grants from boating and waterways. It now looks like that's being put off into the future. There's a possibility that we may not get it at all. It's not a sure thing. We have a fairly heavy debt load, and our debt service is difficult to keep up with, and we can't take on new projects until we pay off the debt on the previous projects. So that's why we need to have an operating surplus every year. And up until this year, we've been pretty much around the 1 million mark in the net operating surplus. This year, we're really low. I don't have the number at hand. I think we're a couple 100,000 or maybe 300,000. It gets down pretty low, and we just so that means that more capital improvement projects are delayed. And back to the funding shift, I think it's got to be stopped. It's a bad trend. We've already accepted the concept that we should pay for the parking lot landscaping. In fact, we're paying the Parks Department $229,000 a year to do work that we think we could do ourselves for $200,000 a year. So I would like us to reverse that shift, and I believe that it's pointless to criticize or reject a proposal unless you offer a rational solution. And I'm prepared to do that. This is not a motion, but it is a scenario whereby we could get back on track with our capital improvement and our necessary repairs without asking slip holders to pay another 2% surcharge and asking our staff to take unpaid furloughs in the amount of 3% of their salaries. So this would be my proposed program. I'm not sure there's more than one way. Well, I know there's more than one way to skin a cat, but this would accomplish, I think, what we're trying to do. And And so the first thing we would do is transfer the responsibility for harbor parking landscape maintenance to ourselves, and perhaps we even privatize it and bid it out, see if we can't get somebody that can beat the $200,000 that we think we can do it for with our own forces. Second, we would delete this parks funding shift that's proposed to be $250,000 in this upcoming budget year. We'd delete that from our budget. We would add a line item of $200,000 for our own maintenance expenses of the work that the Parks Department's been doing for us. I think that there's a reasonably good case made that we take on those 3 restrooms. One is that we probably our users probably use those, maybe not half, but some significant percentage. 2, I think we can do it a lot cheaper than the park department's doing it. And 3, it's not a really big number. It's just $33,000 we're saving there. Next, we would add a line item of funding the 4th of July fireworks, perhaps half at 50%, because we like it. We, as boaters, get a lot of pleasure out of it, harbor users, so that's a nice thing to contribute to the community. And so with those fund shifts back to where they're supposed to be, then we would perhaps be able to lower the line item of slip fees from 4% down to 2%, where our baseline proposal is, and also to reduce the line item of furloughs, unpaid furloughs, from 3% to 2%, so both we and the staff are equally, rowing the boat, pulling the paddles. The net effect of those budget changes would be to add $46,000 to our capital improvement projects, which is not big, but it's a step in the right direction. And as I say, that's not a motion. It's merely, here's a way we could change this really bad policy that we seem to be falling, or the city seem to be falling into, and move forward on a more reasonable basis. So anyway, that's kind of my say, or what I have to say here.
Commissioner Owen.
Okay, well, I certainly want to echo, we'll take this on in a bit. Charlie, thanks for doing the work on that. I want to echo the concerns about the transfers. I think I've asked this before, Mr. Bridley, but would you please define the Tideland area? Tideland Trust area.
Well, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Owen, the simple one is it goes out 3 miles. The one as it relates to where it ends and where it starts along the shoreline is always more difficult and to a degree somewhat under debate. I think it's safe to say that everything south or ocean side of Cabrillo Boulevard is within the State Tidelands grant area. And there are areas to the north of Cabrillo Boulevard that fall into that Tidelands Trust area also, because many, many years ago, a lot of that was almost submerged or slough land, inundated with water. So the State Tideland boundary, if you will, kind of meandered above Cabrillo Boulevard. So I think it's safe to say from Ledbetter Point to almost the easterly boundary of the city property at East Beach, and everything south of Cabrillo Boulevard would qualify.
Okay, and of course, something that I've argued before is that I think we have several large hotels which I think could be fairly argued that are in the Tideland Trust from my point of view, and they're raising massive amounts of revenue, that some of which through a bed tax is going back to the city. But I personally, I worry that we only talk about the waterfront department when we talk about raising revenue in the Tidelands area. So much of what we're talking about as far as beaches, and it used to be, the last time we went through this, we were talking about park maintenance, but things like dolphin fountain and restrooms, so much of that is utilized by tourists, by people visiting the community. And, you know, I love our tourist revenue, and I think, you know, where would Santa Barbara be without them? But here again, and this is not something that you can do, or really we'd have to do it as a vote of the city. If we can raise money to clean up our creeks through Measure D by raising the bed tax, we sure as heck can pay for lifeguards for the tourists who frequent our beaches. It's really time that we quit trying to expect locals to, you know, pay for services that, at least in large part, are catering to visitors. That's a little commentary there, obviously. Let's see. You know, restrooms, Charlie, I'd say Stearns Wharf. A long time ago, I suggested the waterfront department should start maintaining that. It could really use the waterfront's touch, and a big portion of our visitors to Stearns Wharf stop there on the way or on the way back. I have no problem with that. Ledbetter Beach, that's a little dubious. You know, we got one business that does pay to the waterfront department nearby. It has its own restroom, of course. So really, it's beachgoers that are using the Ledbetter Beach one. That one's dubious, in my opinion. And the one down in Palm Park doesn't have anything to do with the waterfront department. I know it's not a large line item, but hey, you know. So I wouldn't recommend that personally.
40 grand.
And the dolphin fountain, give me a break. I mean, that is a city landmark. That has nothing to do with boat owners. And I do have to echo what Mr. Longerberger said. The perception is that we're talking about a bunch of rich boat owners, and that is, I think, the impression that some people have of the waterfront, people who have boats in the waterfront, and this just doesn't match the people that I know and the people that I lived around for many years. You know, there's a few people that are, you know, quite wealthy, but there's, just looking around the room here, I think these are just average folks. And, you know, it's just unfair to expect these folks to pay for the dolphin fountain or for lifeguards. A couple of questions. How much of the capital budget is discretionary? I noticed, am I reading this right, that the breakwater lights, are still in the budget? Is that correct? I mean, there's $250,000 right there, right? Is that discretionary?
Yes, that's just one scenario. In earlier meetings, we had another scenario where we removed the breakwater lights, and there are various projects we can push back, move around, eliminate at any time.
Okay, well, if we can chip away at this and go at least down to the 2% increase and avoid a 4% increase, and if one way is to not spend $250,000 in a couple of years on lighting, I would think that's a good thing. Obviously, there's a safety issue. I realize there's nothing good. No capital project that we could eliminate is a good thing. I mean, they're all important and necessary, but that's the one that stood out the most for me as being discretionary. By the way, I just got to say, I don't really think staff wants to become the kings of the restrooms. You know, this isn't the restroom empire. You know, I don't see that at all. And I don't think they want to pay for lifeguards, especially if they don't have any really say in the program. So I don't think staff does that. I think he has to give the scenario, the justification. And I don't agree with it. The nexus between, or the synergy between the lifeguards and the waterfront department could be said of the police department. We've got police department going up and down Cabrillo Boulevard all the time. Why don't we pay for them? Fire department responds near the waterfront. Why don't we pay for them? Why doesn't the police department pay every time the waterfront, the harbor patrol backs up the police on a traffic stop? They don't do that. Right? As far as I know. Okay. So if there's maybe synergy goes both ways. If somebody is hurt on the beach, doesn't the waterfront department respond? Maybe the parks department should be paying for that. I mean, why is it just one way? I don't understand this. And just really, this is really petty. The meeting room, I'm trying to remember from the last meeting I was at, what is the total increase in revenue we get from bumping up the meeting room? It's a couple $100 or something, or $1,000 or something.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Owen, it's negligible.
Yeah, then why do it? Why hit some of the nonprofits? Is AA still meeting in there?
Yes, that's correct.
Well, why are we going to hit Alcoholics Anonymous with a doubling of a fee just because they're not ocean related for nothing? Please, let's not do that. And for now, that's what I've got. Maybe we'll get into some more specifics in a bit. Thank you.
Commissioner Kramer.
And I would agree that non-waterfront related expenses should not be borne by slip holders if it's at all possible. And I would hope that the fees would not be increased by 4%. And clearly, I don't think we can judge the 1,133 slips in the harbor by the number of people here. But clearly, there are a lot of people who are not affluent, who are boat owners. And I believe that approximately 50% of the slip holders have boats that are below 30 feet in length, or perhaps it's 35, I'm not sure. I would hope that there could be some sort of graduated slip fee increase. I noticed that got dropped in the 4%, that 20-foot boats are no longer exempt from an increase. But also I think what Mr. Young said, that there should be some funds coming in return for what is being taken, is very, very, very valuable. But I think we've got to keep in mind that the Waterfront Department does get all the revenues from the parking lots. And that from the City Council point of view, I suspect that there's an argument that could be made for beach usage being put onto the waterfront. I mean, something has got to give in this particular economy. But I think one thing that we as the Harbor Commission, we asked for a breakdown of what staff costs and what should be cut. And we haven't been talking about that. I mean, one thing that I've noticed in the 2 years that I've been here, we say every meeting how much we like the staff and how much we appreciate what the staff is doing. What's changed? I don't think anything's changed in that. I think the services that are provided by the Waterfront Department are very, very desired and needed. So where is the money to come from? I'm kind of at a loss for this. I mean, it would be good if more funds could come in from the parking, but that would tend to affect the businesses there. I don't know what the answer is. I tend to go, I mean, maybe it's wrong, but I tend to support the staff recommendations. And that's where I come down. I think Commissioner Watson's list here is extremely innovative, and I think it should be considered before the final budget gets put forth to the city. Maybe all the details don't make sense. I think that the Waterfront Department can take over the restrooms. I would disagree with Mr. Owen. I don't think that's such a big deal, but also particularly since many of those people who are using the bathrooms there are in fact parking in the parking lots. I mean, it's very hard to know who's paying for what and what the charges are. And on that basis, I don't really have much more to say, except I thank you, Charlie Watson, for this list. I mean, I think it's really, really innovative and really good.
Commissioner Owen.
Thank you. I'm sure you have a lot of things. Appreciate you holding back. What was the criteria you used to decide which staff positions to cut? I mean, I tend to agree with Betsy. That's not the first place that I want to go, but did you pick the ones that are the least likely to, or the ones that we'd miss the most, John? It almost seems that way.
Mr. Chair, we picked them carefully. We collectively met as a management team. This was probably one of the more difficult things that we had to do because we have now published publicly who would potentially be the first to go. So we had to meet with each of those individuals and tell them that this recommendation is coming forward to the Harbor Commission. So how did we pick them? We picked them in a way that we felt we would least impact the services that are provided to all aspects of the department.
Okay. And then finally, what about, we don't know what's going to happen with the economy. There's a lot of questions. One thing that's been mentioned a couple times tonight is that we don't know that these fee increases will stay as recommended. They may be reduced. Who knows? Maybe things will get worse. What's your feeling on asking the council to let us dip into the reserves? We know why the reserves are there. They're there for a rainy day. I think we're in a rainy day. Hopefully we don't have an economic collapse and a storm that takes out Stearns Wharf. That's the downside of doing anything with the reserves. But the mandated reserve levels are what we're bumping up against here. And why can't we relax them? Why can't we ask that they be relaxed?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Owen, you certainly have the prerogative to make that recommendation to the City Council.
I think I agree with virtually every comment that I've heard up here, except Betsy, and I forgot it because I didn't write it down. One where you, correct me if I'm wrong, did you say you agreed with the staff recommendation in principle? Okay. So that's the only one of your comments that I don't particularly agree with. When I look at this, I see, that's why I can't see my page, a number of options here, basically. And there are three principal ways that we could go. One is staff cuts. Two is to accept the program shift, cut maintenance, cut capital improvements, and jack the fees. Three would be to reject the principal program shifts, and particularly in light of the $1.3 million that we have in proposed reductions and quasi-reasonable fee increases. That is not a small number. The only thing that gives me any heart in this whole matter is this is a one-year budget that we're working with. My concern is there are 2 miles, I clocked it with my car, there are 2 miles of free street-side parking on Cabrillo Boulevard that accommodates hundreds of automobiles of people that walk across the sidewalk and use all of the waterfront facilities, the beaches, everything. These people pay mucho grande zero to access the waterfront and start using the facilities. They don't pay a cent, other than the fact that they're citizens or tourists in the city of Santa Barbara. So as far as the nexus of it being only the people that park in the parking lot, that shifts dramatically with that consideration. The second consideration is if you would park your car on any day, particularly the weekends when we have the greatest usage of the waterfront, and you watch how people arrive. For every car that comes in, there is a cloud of human beings that cross the streets where there are lights, where there are corners. And these people now proceed to use the beaches and to use the facilities of the waterfront department. They pay no parking either. They have already paid to stay in a motel or a hotel or their local residence, which means they have already paid. I believe it was Ms. Novak who made the point that they're taxpayers. And these people have already paid for the access to the park. I don't know how many parks we have in the city of Santa Barbara, but this one is called Chase Palm Park. No one pays to access Shoreline Park. No one pays to access Oak Park. No, and I could do this for all the parks. We all pay our property taxes. So why is the general public is the waterfront department now suddenly this nexus for paying for public access, citizens and tourists, to Chase Palm Park? I see no nexus other than it's a public facility that everybody's already paying for. So in this whole budget situation, my principal concern is the program shift. Because it's a trend now. This becomes the second attempt on the part, or the second desire on the part of the city council, and I must say, the city administrator, who's making the recommendation, to move costs into enterprise zones, which basically is lifting money out of the enterprise fund. And it bothers me extremely because the last time this happened, and it was the maintenance of the landscaping, we were not even allowed to find out if we could do it cheaper, which calls to question the motivation of why it's being done. So I think we have some, and the last point that I wanted to make is our projections are, and I hope they're good, are very much a house of cards, and we really don't know where any of this is going, which is why I'm extremely pleased that this is a one-year budget. My hope is that we're all delighted and revenues increase, and this is not nearly as drastic as it appears, the $1.3 million. Because I believe in it being a random walk, it could just as easily be much worse than we are planning for, which means we will be in our reserves, and that's why we have them. We'll have to go there. So in solving this problem, my recommendation, and then we're going to have to work through some of these items, is let's not be too draconian in what we do, because if we plan incorrectly, that's why we have reserves. We can use a reserve, hopefully, to fix an inappropriate plan in the next year, because then we will know clearly, indeed, we're tacking to port badly, and we have to adjust the helm and ease the sheets, or we're just going to round up and be in a bad way.
On the rocks.
Pardon?
On the rocks.
On the rocks. So that's my take on it. And now I think we have to, and I want to thank all of those of you in the audience who came, and all of those who came up to speak, including Mr. Keating, who didn't get to speak. My error. Okay, later.
Any comment?
So now, pardon?
I got a comment and a question.
Okay, so now Mr. Owen would like the mic again.
Okay, thanks. As far as staff recommendations go, the comment is I'm not interested in putting anyone out of work in this economy. And really, Frank, you're absolutely right. That's draconian also. As bad as the 4% slip increases for boat owners, it's just as draconian to say we need to start firing people. It might ultimately make things worse. Charlie, help me out here. Explain number 7 a little bit better to me. I didn't. That's also about furloughs and.
Oh, well, okay. On our 6-year projection, on the chart, the spreadsheet we were given, there was a cost reduction item of providing or having staff take mandatory furloughs, unpaid furloughs, that would amount to 3% of their salaries. Now, as Commissioner Anakushin pointed out on that subject, when you send somebody on a furlough, everybody loses because the work doesn't get done, and the employee doesn't get paid. Commissioner Kelly was showing me something out of an advertisement in Sunday's paper where a local firm was all of the employees got together and said, "Hey, we're going to take a cut. I think it was 10%, and that way we can stay in business and we can better serve our customers." Now, I find it sad that we don't have the opportunity to ask our staff if they could help us out with a 10%, for example, pay cut, temporary pay cut, until things start to look better, in order to save the organization. And I was done in a firm I worked for many years ago, and the company survived. And you told the story, or I've told you the story, so I won't tell again. But we all felt that we were pulling together, and that the company prospered in the end, and so did we. So I think it's kind of an insult that we're not permitted to even ask the employees to pitch in because of union rules. But
What you're proposing actually is reducing the furlough time.
yes. So if instead of losing 3% of their pay, they'd only be losing 2% of their pay, and that would be. And the point that I was making as an example that we'd be asking the employees to take the same percentage of pain that the slip holders are being asked to with the slip increase, and that was merely an illustration of my suggestion.
Mr. Chair, I must clarify this: the furlough amount is a 5% cut in pay for all city employees.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley.
Okay, if that's true, I stand corrected. But when I read the spreadsheet, it looked like it was 3%. But whatever. I mean, the principle doesn't change.
But either way, you're suggesting that they take less of a furlough.
Well, no, I was suggesting that if we got rid of this fund transfer,
right, under that scenario,
perhaps we wouldn't have to be so demanding of the staff.
Good idea.
Anyways,
let's see if we can start working through this without motions, because otherwise it gets tangled up a little bit. Charlie gave us a kind of a shot at it, so we can discuss some things back and forth. I didn't hear anybody say that they, correct me if I'm wrong, were in favor of the program shift. So I don't know, maybe I should start that as that actually could be a motion.
Well, I I'm prepared to make a motion that would include the program shift that basically addresses the program shift.
Yeah, because some of what Charlie's got here includes the dolphin fountain and the restrooms and the fireworks and lots of the program.
Yeah, I kind of got into how would we balance it. I'm an engineer, and I'm faced with a problem. I want to solve it. And maybe that's not my place to do in this forum.
Somebody has to start
But
somewhere.
anyway, that's what I do. So let me take a crack at a motion with respect to the waterfront funding shift proposal. And that would be, I would move that we do four things: that we privatize the landscaping of the parking lots, that we go ahead and take on the 3 restroom maintenance and repair costs and operate it ourselves, because we know we can do it cheaper and better. Pay 50% of the 4th of July costs, because we certainly share in the joy of the fireworks and the 4th of July celebration. And decline the funding of the lifeguards. So that gives us the wherewithal to do the positive things that I was talking about in earlier. And so that would be one motion. And along as a corollary to that, I would like us to strongly recommend to the City Council that funding program shifts to the Waterfront Department enterprise not be used as a budget balancing strategy due to the negative impact on the visitors, residents, and harbor users. So that would be my motion in 2 parts.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'd be ready to do that, except I know we're not talking about a lot, but I just can't. stomach the Dolphin Fountain, and I can't stomach the restroom down at Chase Palm Park, probably literally, but those. So I mean, so really, if I were making your motion, I'd go. I guess I can handle 50% of fireworks, but I would say basically the restroom at Ledbetter Beach and at Stearns Wharf. Period on that part.
No, my rationale here is that, we want to pay our way, and if we're enjoying a benefit that we get some percentage of maybe near something 40, 50%, whatever, that we got to share in that, and so I just don't have any heartburn over that, and so. Rather than just take a take it or leave it stand or my way or the highway, I like to try to, maybe we're not meeting them halfway, but at least we want to be reasonable, and we want to be part of the solution.
Mm-hmm. And I agree. So that's why I was saying I think that we should do some of those. The Dolphin Fountain is just the beginning. Where does it stop? What else are we going to be asked to do? I mean, the Dolphin Fountain, where does that come from? That's what I'm trying to.
Yeah, well,
that's
the point. But I think it's a lot better than just giving the money to somebody else to spend. That way we lose control of it. If we're maintaining the Dolphin Fountain, okay, we can decide the level of maintenance that we want to do that we think is appropriate, and if they don't like the way we maintain it, they can always take it back.
So okay.
Mr. Chair,
hold on,
Mr.
Charlie.
Chair, if I could just add, because there was no breakdown given, the cost annually for the Dolphin Fountain is about $3,800. It's mostly water and electricity, a little bit of chlorine. And just so you also know, we maintain everything around the Dolphin Fountain. In fact, if I was to do anything, I would give them back the little wall that sits in front of it that has the Stearns Wharf sign. It's been hit twice by cars. It's cost us over $26,000 to repair it. So I'd trade them the Dolphin Fountain for that wall that's in front and that sign.
Can we do that?
I don't believe that's on the table, but I just wanted to put in context the cost of the Dolphin Fountain, and it's somewhat integral to the restroom because the water and the electricity is hooked to the same facility.
Okay, fair enough, but I'm not going to second his motion because when we start maintaining restrooms that aren't next to waterfront facilities, I'm talking about the restroom at Chase Palm Park, then we're going to be asked to do the landscaping and everything else. Where does it stop? So.
God, you're tougher than me, Ken.
Mr. Chair, again, just so we're clarifying, the restroom that we're talking about is at the visitor center at the pony ride lot. We collect revenue from that lot. We collect revenue from the visitor center because we have a lease with the visitor center at that location. So I think just so you're making sure we have the same restroom, we do have some connection as it relates to that facility.
Okay, you're right. Sorry, I was misunderstanding
Okay,
that.
just for clarification, sorry, I was already going, Betsy. The total cost of the 3 restrooms, so that we can hash this through if we can, John, that right now they're telling us that would cost. If I'm
no, you have to think of this in a different way.
Okay.
The savings to the general fund is approximately $30,000 to $50,000 if we assume that cost. If we would pay the Parks Department, I would hazard to guess it will be substantially more than that. So this is our cost. This is added cost for us to take on those responsibilities. That we've estimated it to be in that magnitude of $35,000 to $50,000. I've never maintained them. I don't know how much toilet paper and sanitizer we're going to have to use there, so it's hard for us to tell you today whether it's going to cost that or more. I'm hopeful it might be less, but I hope you bear with me in understanding we don't know because this is a new facility for us. Long term, there's capital improvements, there's roofs, there's repairs, etc. So I'm more worried about the long-term obligations than I am the annual cleaning, closing, repairing, toilet papering,
etc. Okay, so Commissioner Watson, you have a motion that you made that I'm not hearing anybody jump up and second, because apparently it has a couple of cracks in it. So,
Tell me what they are. I'll work on them.
okay, Commissioner Owen, I'm sorry, Betsy, Kramer, yes.
Okay, yeah,
got it.
I'm not seconded it, Charlie, because I think it's too complicated. I'm going to suggest that your two-part motion be made into two motions, and that we start with the process that we, as the Harbor Commission, oppose a transfer of funds, of costs from non-waterfront related issues.
Okay, so
things.
you'll
And then go on to discuss whether we want to pay for toilets or not.
whether we want to what?
Pay for toilets or not,
Pay the
paper
toilets?
and
Oh.
so forth. So, I mean, I'm just saying, we should start at the.
Okay, so
I mean, the five of us 2 months ago
so would you would
spoke
like me
in
to?
opposition to this, and I don't think anything has
Okay,
changed.
so you would like me to break B off from A?
Exactly.
Okay, so why don't I start with B then? I'll make the motion for B. Strongly recommend to the City Council that funding program shifts to the Waterfront Department enterprise not be used as a budget balancing strategy due to the negative impact on visitors, residents, and harbor users.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'd second that.
All right. Is there any discussion to that motion? Don't want to get called, but going too fast here. Okay, so it's been made, seconded, no discussion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? That motion passed unanimously.
Okay, now let me try A. Waterfront funding shift motion. Private landscaping, number one. Number two, privatize landscaping, number one. Number two, take on the 3 restroom maintenance and repair, including the dolphin fountain. 3, pay 50% of the July 4th costs. And 4, declined funding of the lifeguards.
Second.
Discussion. Excuse me. I have a point to discuss and on this, and as to why I'm going to have difficulty with it. And that is because I'm going to try something that Mr. Briley just brought up, which sounds good, and something I'd like to ask to about the 4th of July, and see if you'd be willing to reconsider your motion. If we accept the 3 restrooms and the dolphin fountain, in that motion, let's ask the city to take the wall that says Santa Barbara back. If we're going to take the restrooms and the fountain, they can have the wall. Well, this is just horse trading. I'm from Texas. We do this all the time. So if possibly you could wheel that in, Charlie, that way we don't have to pay the $26,000 year after year when people can't make that turn. And then the second thing, in offsetting this 50% of the 4th of July, one of our speakers that came up made a comment that hit me, and that is, can the people that come and use the parking lots on that day help pay? So I was thinking, is it possible that we could consider an event parking fee for 4th of July only that would exempt people that held in either of the 2 parking permits? So this would be a small group and would primarily catch tourists or people who very infrequently come down to the harbor but would only come for that one day. So if they had the, John help me, they had the slip holders permit, and then there's the other one, I don't know what that one's called. The general permit. So those 2 groups would be exempted, and they would not have, say, a surcharge of whatever the commission might decide that is. And then that would help, that would make the accepting the 50% for the 4th of July more palatable, because then the general public is indeed helping in the parking area. That would be that's my discussion on it.
So question would be, is how much would that raise?
But it would be, at least we're doing something about it. So let's say 500 people paid it, and let's say it was $10. So that would be $5,000. But if a person is coming down and they're parking at 10 o'clock and they're staying until 10 o'clock at night, a $10 surcharge to come to a fireworks show for the whole day and to enjoy the beach doesn't seem on that particular day, because there's not a slot open in the lots.
Okay, I had a discussion on both of these. You know, I am warming up to this idea because people are being very creative with ways that the waterfront community can pay for things. Why don't we be very creative in ways of offsetting it then? As far as the wall goes, that's just too complicated, Frank. I really just don't think we can go there. I mean, you know what the reaction's going to be. You know, yeah, we'll do this part of this structure, but not this part of the structure. You know, we'll take the cheaper part. You have the more expensive part. That's going to seem kind of petty, I think. So I hope that we'd put that in our motion, Charlie, that I second
Okay,
it.
thank you, Ken.
But I think he might be onto something.
I like Frank's idea. I guess it would be appropriate for me to amend my motion to, under item 3, pay for 50% of the 4th of July costs and charge an event parking lot fee accepting parking permit holders.
What was the first one? I missed that. I
mean, pay 50%. Well, number 3 is what I said already. That pay 50% of the 4th of July costs, and have an event parking lot fee, event parking fee that accepts holders of waterfront parking permits.
Do you have a number on that, or is that something we'll come up with later?
You want to use $10? That's fine with me.
Well, that's what the motion is, Charlie.
Okay. Well, yes, $10 fee.
Okay. Does everybody understand the motion? Now, is there a second to the amended motion?
I will second it, but I want to throw it back to staff at some point, and I know Betsy's waiting to ask a question.
Okay. So we're in the discussion part. Commissioner Kramer.
I understand. I think $10 is too high for people coming down to park at the waterfront on something that has historically not been charged, but that's a fairly small point, I think. I'm concerned about this privatizing of the parking lot maintenance. How do you plan to have that done?
Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah.
The same way we do the restrooms. We have contract. We put out a contract.
Okay. All right. But I think in terms of them presenting a budget, don't we have to come up with some kind of figure? When
this came around before, and we were expected to shift a whole lot of money to the park department, we figured out what we thought we could do that maintenance for.
Okay, I wasn't here at that time.
Yeah. And so that number was somewhere in the vicinity of $200,000 based on our experience in maintaining things at the harbor. So we thought we had a pretty good handle on how much money we were going to save. And what we would do is put this out to bid, and if they can do it cheaper than we can, well, good on them. We'll let them do it.
Thank you. Okay. Does that sound reasonable, Mr. Bradley?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Kramer, the concept of making a request to have the parking lot maintenance returned to us to contract for, privatize, find a different way to do it that saves money is certainly reasonable. It's, as Charlie indicated, it's something that was discussed previously. So I think the concept of returning that opportunity to the department is reasonable. If I may join in a little bit on the parking issue. If you came to the waterfront department and you parked all day, you would pay $10 for that day. So if you're just an hourly parker, not a permit holder, you will pay that $10 fee that you're talking about. Typically, we also charge, if you come at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and you're last in and you're at the La Playa lots, which we don't necessarily man, we charge $5 upon entry. So I think we're doing the things that you're talking about, but I really would caution you, I don't know that it's going to be beneficial for us to agree exactly on what that fee should be. If the concept, again, is an event fee, give us the opportunity to work with you as to what that fee should be. Because, again, if it's $10, that's what we're currently collecting. And, again, we already do a $5 upon entry fee later in the afternoon because we aren't going to necessarily be able to collect it at 10 o'clock when the fireworks are out. We just want people to be able to go home.
Right.
Well, I guess maybe I didn't make myself clear. Am I interrupting you?
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Charlie. We're in the discussion.
Yeah,
now.
I was thinking in terms of a fee surcharge. Yeah, additional to what we already charge. Now, I think that's probably what you understood, Betsy.
Yes, it is, and I found it.
Yeah, I didn't make it clear, and I should have.
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Owen.
So that's what I was going to make the point, John. I'm flexible, and if you wanted to not name a figure right now, but it should be at least double the amount that you pay after 4 o'clock, and it should be a surcharge or a surcharge on top of the maximum daily fee. I don't know how we can, we have to start looking at these kinds of options, I think, and I'd like to see that written into the ultimately some kind of an estimate, when it goes to council. I mean, I wish we had it in front of us and we could vote on it and know what that's going to be and work with it ahead of time, but I'd like to see that in the budget and see if there's some decent numbers there.
Okay. Big discussion. So, Charlie, is anybody else confused on what the issue actually is at this moment? Or what the motion is?
No, the only thing that we've left open is John's suggestion that maybe the amount could be left open.
Well, does anyone have any strong feelings one way or the other?
Well, I gasped at $10. That seems a little high.
Yeah. Okay.
But what I'd like to see, it's hard to be creative because usually, if we had had this discussion last month, I wasn't here, then we could have asked you to look at that, and then we'd see what is $5 more, what is $10 more, what does that do to the budget? Is it worth it? Could you guys right now give us a wild guesstimate on that? I'd love to. Oh, come on, you could, but you might feel
no, you can't,
doing
because it all depends upon whether or not the lot fills up with people that park with their permits first. Then there aren't many stalls that are going to be subject to the fee. If you're exempting the permit,
you don't know. I mean, based on, I guess you'd have to look at the records to look at what you're collecting on an average 4th of July.
Yes, absolutely. That's what we would have to do to guesstimate or give you a better estimate as to doubling that fee or tripling that fee. As to
is
what
it
that
thousands of cars?
It's thousands of dollars that we generate revenue that day, but I don't know how many are on an hourly basis, how many pay that $5 upon entry. I mean, we'd have to do that research to really give you a number that I think you're comfortable with. And the other thing, one of the commissioners talked about with me before the meeting, I would also go to our Harbor Merchants and Stearns Wharf Association and ask for them to share in the cost. I don't think it'd be unreasonable for them to contribute. They benefit from the day. Why wouldn't they benefit by their Merchants Association contributing? The concept that you're pursuing is probably more important than the mechanics. Maybe you want to land on the mechanics here tonight, and I certainly understand that. But I think the message that you're making is that if you're going to contribute some cost, whether it's 50% or all of it, you want to find a way to offset that to the department. And I think there are ways, whether there are parking surcharge fee or there are contributions from the Merchants Association or other groups such as Sparkle that could participate in some ways. I think at least I'm getting the message as to what you're interested in. But I caution the commission to, shall I say, kind of narrow it down, because I think there may be other ways that we can get to it. But look at surcharge, look at other funding sources that can help offset the costs. That's a good recommendation.
So here we're still in this.
Yeah, are we having heartburn over the event parking surcharge or just over the amount that we're trying to set it at? Because I don't mind taking that whole event parking thing back out unless we need it in here in order to be able to do it.
Well, I think, go ahead.
Oh, well, actually, Mr. Bradley has pointed out that there might be other ways to collect even more revenue from 4th of July.
Okay, so what if
parking is the main thing. So if it's helpful, John, to have in the motion something about how we could recoup costs. I don't know what's the proper wording for that. If you don't even have to say a surcharge, or a surcharge and other explore surcharge and other avenues of recouping some of the costs. How's that sound, Charlie?
I would tend to agree that would be helpful, because then the direction is you're willing to make the contribution, assuming there's an exploration of ways to offset that, whether it's through parking or contributions from other associations, merchants, etc.
Okay.
Works for me.
Okay, let me see if I got it right now. Pay 50% of 4th of July costs and explore ways to offset those costs.
With some such ases.
Such as an event parking fee surcharge.
Request of the merchants associations and others, et cetera. And then you've kind of given the ball a push.
Did you get that, Mary?
Okay, you got that, Mary? Tell me what I just...
What you just proposed.
Staff will explore a variety of ways to offset the cost through parking surcharge, merchants associations, and other sources.
That's good. That's
good.
I'm going to miss you, Mary.
Okay.
Okay. My second is I second the amended motion.
Any further discussion on the amended motion? Do we need to read the whole motion over again, or do we have it? I think, do we have it? Does everybody get it? Okay. What you've got in your notes? No, just the one that we're voting on, because we already voted on the first one.
Okay, moved to approve the waterfront funding shift by if you privatize landscaping.
No. We already passed a motion that said we disapprove of the funding shift, and Charlie was specific on that, and we wanted to tell the...
Well, I think she started out right. I think she's got it. My motion, I believe the motion I made was with regard to the funding shift, that we privatize the landscaping, we take on 3 restroom maintenance and repair, plus the Dolphin Fountain. Okay. We pay 50% of 4th of July costs and explore ways to offsite with the examples that you suggested, and decline funding the lifeguards.
Yeah, that last part was rather important.
Okay.
Okay, that's good.
And that's the
Move
motion.
the question.
And that's the motion that's been seconded. Yeah. Is there any further discussion on that motion? Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Okay, so there's an abstention on that. Okay, so 3 ayes and an abstention. Okay, now we're on the rest of the budget. I don't think we can vote. There can't be a vote on the $25 lineal slip fee transfer, because that is a clear conflict of interest for Commissioners Watson and myself. And there's only 2 of you left, so we don't have a quorum on that point.
Thank you, Will.
Pardon? Yes. So then we have the rest of the budget.
So it's a slip fee increase. And it seems like the scenario that we're advocating here, what we just voted on, if I understand if that was all approved and we could proceed with that, and we weren't asked to do the lifeguards, and we were able to do the maintenance or privatized maintenance, contracted out, then 2% slip fee would be adequate.
We are now voting for the base budget.
So there were two proposals, one with a 4% and one with a 2%, is my understanding. And we would be voting on the 2% slip fee increase.
Okay, so
We have those two different drafts. The 2% is the attachment 3.
right, so
in my
let me
packet.
get to that. So we're calling it the base. What's that? Base, the 2% slip-in fee.
That's the one we had last month.
Right.
Without the 4%.
But we don't have it in this packet.
No, we presented it this evening.
There, it's there.
Yes, we presented the baseline budget.
On the
What's in the staff report?
Actually, in your
It's
packet, Charlie.
in
it's
all
attachment
aspects of the baseline budget were presented here this evening.
Basically, what I guess the motion could be
corrected, I suppose.
then is that approve the budget, draft budget as outlined in attachment 3.
Is that correct, John? That's the way I'm saying it?
That has the shifts with layoff, though.
No.
If the commission is interested in voting for a budget that does not include the 4% slip fee increase, a recommendation to adopt the baseline budget as presented by staff will be sufficient.
Thank you. I'm getting a tail.
He is the parliamentarian.
Well, we get ourselves all
Okay,
in a
then that's
fluster
my
up
motion.
here. Okay, that's your motion. Is there a second to that?
I'll second that.
Is there any further discussion on that motion? Go ahead.
What's going to happen if it doesn't?
Microphone.
What will happen if there's not enough money there to meet the difference? I mean, we don't know what we're voting on in this particular situation. We're saying we recommend a 2% increase, but what if a 2% increase isn't sufficient?
What if 4% isn't sufficient?
Well, I mean,
There's always next year.
I mean, I'm asking the sort of a general question. I'm not sure really what we're voting on this.
Mr. Chair?
Mr.
The way the budgetary process works going forward is once the Harbor Commission has deliberated the budget, which I think we've done a fair job of over the last few months, you make a recommendation to the City Council as an advisory recommendation for their consideration in regards to the Waterfront Department's budget. You just made two recommendations that I'm aware of. One that says you aren't in favor of the program shift as it affects the Waterfront Department. You are interested in only certain aspects of the program shift as you described. I think there were 4 components of it. And you have the option to either not vote on this item or vote on it. Those recommendations then will be presented along with the department's budget when we go to the City Council. It may be that the Harbor Commission's recommendation is different than staff's.
Great, thank you.
This is staff's recommendation, the one that's in the book here.
So does that clarify it? Okay, so
Let me ask a question as part of discussion. Back to the reserves issue. Your recommendation isn't that we dip into reserves for this year, this coming year.
That's correct.
Would it be helpful to add that as a possibility, as a kind of a rainy day scenario if things get worse?
That's what it's for.
Helpful to the department?
All
or
of us, yes, to the department.
Well, since I've been in this chair for 13 years, I've never recommended that we dip into the reserves. I think the reserves are what they are intended for. I do not believe we're at a catastrophic position in the department to balance the budget. I think some of the recommendations that you've made are right on the mark relative to an attempt to strategize and balance that budget. I'm glad we're not facing a $9 million shortfall like the general fund is. Our shortfall is far short of that. And I think with some fee adjustments, as we've recommended in the baseline budget, we can get through this next year. I think Scott and I are both optimistic that things are beginning to turn around based on some of the numbers that we've seen even in the last quarter. And hopefully there won't be any further need to either look to reserves or to even adjust the fees as that we've talked before. But having said that, if the commission feels that that's an avenue or an alternative for pursuing strategizing balancing this budget, you certainly have the prerogative to make that recommendation. It is not one the department is currently entertaining.
Well, the only place that I could see that would be important is if you were forced to cut staff or dip into the reserves, then maybe it would become part of your recommendation. Or, as a way to avoid a 4% increase. But I'll just throw that out.
Okay, the recommendation is, and I apologize, it must be because I'm getting a little tired. It's amazing that anybody's got all this under control. So the budget recommendation, the recommendation that we have, Mary, would you read it one more time? And do we have a motion and a second on that? Yeah. No, not the one that was coming up for a vote, and it's on the basic,
Just move
the basic
to adopt
budget.
the baseline budget presented by staff.
Well, I didn't hear a second.
So that would.
I'll second that. Yeah.
Okay, so there was a motion made, and there was a second on that, and then there was more discussion, and then a comment popped up, and that's where we kind of wandered off, and I lost it. Okay, all right, so motion's made, motion seconded. Is there any further discussion on that? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Any abstentions? All right, it passed. Whew. Staff, commission communications, Mr. Bradley.
Not this evening. I think we've had sufficient. Unless Bob wants to address us, then we.
Bob.
Bob wants to talk. Come on, Bob. We've been waiting all night to hear you.
Thank you.
I know I've got a pleasant topic and it doesn't go too well with the heavy discussions you've had, but just a quickie. I spent this afternoon down at Port Hueneme on a special tour of the USS Stockdale, which is a missile destroyer. It's the newest ship in the United States Navy, and it has been adopted by the Santa Barbara Navy League. And it was overwhelming to me to see this ship that's just a fraction of the size of a conventional cruiser in World War II that has the fighting power of several cruisers and a destructive range of over 1,000 miles. And wonderful crew, captain, and so on. What I'd like to suggest is, at another meeting, you consider making a motion to do the same thing that has been done with the USS Ronald Reagan that is also an adopted ship by the Navy League, and that is work towards an invitation to have the Stockdale come to Santa Barbara. It was named after Admiral James Stockdale, who received the Congressional Medal of Honor, and I think he's the only one that had that, plus one of the other major medals, for his conduct and support to the troops while he was a prisoner of war in the Vietnam War. So it's a suggestion that you might want to consider inviting that ship here. I talked to the skipper. It takes time and processing and so on, so it might be 2 or 3 years before it could get here, but it's a Santa Barbara adopted ship. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. All right, and were there any staff commission communications?
Not this evening.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second? I'll second it. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Passes.